Thank you very much, Professor Kullar, for first inviting me and being so accommodating uh, to enable this by Zoom. I also want to thank the program coordinator, Alia Rees, also for being the host for this event. So without further ado, let me basically tell you what I intend to do and how I will do it. I'm going to talk about the Gaza war and its geopolitical consequences, a little bit of its antecedents also, so that you understand the context of this war. And I'm going to try and do that in 10 points at the most. So bear with me. I will probably speak to you for about 35 minutes, and then I'll be happy to take your questions and answers. This war is extremely significant because before these two wars, the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine began or happened, the United States was primarily focused on China, and the US grand strategy was to contain China and also contain its aggressive policies in Southeast Asia. The primary goal of the Indo-Pacific strategy was to keep the Indo-Pacific open for trade and basically protect countries in that region from China's aggressive policy. It is quite possible that we are entering into a new Cold War with China, and that might dictate American foreign policy and global politics for the next 10 to 20 years or even more. And there is also this perception among some people that inevitably China will become the most powerful country, and so there will have to be a transition in the global order. So we are going through a period that is as, shall we say, profound as the period immediately following World War II, when the United States constructed the international liberal order, created the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, etc. So the challenge that China had posed to the US was going to be very profound. But suddenly, two wars happened which have dragged the United States back into pre-China geopolitics. And so US is once again defending its allies and its national interests in the Middle East and in Europe at the same time. Coming to Hamas attack and Israeli response to it since October 7th, most of the discussions and narratives, at least in the West, are taking place as if history began on October 7th. And you have to understand that everything was not hunky-dory and out of pure hatred for either Israel or Jews that Hamas immediately attacked Israel. The planning itself went on for several months, and there are reports that some of the maneuvers that Hamas indulged in, it was practicing openly, watched by Israeli army. There are several arguments as to why Hamas did that, but the primary reason is that since 2007 onwards, Gaza has been in a very tight, shall we say, blockade by Israel, and the quality of life there has suffered terribly under the brutal military occupation of Israel. And during the same process, Israel has continued to build settlements and expanded its settlements in West Bank. And basically what you have is an apartheid state. So there are two people and two different laws and one country, literally. With each passing day, the Palestinians see that there is less chances of them getting their independent state in West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, which is what the United Nations deemed way back. So there was this constant pressure that they are living under an inhumane military occupation, and the promise of freedom was disappearing with every new settlement that Israel was building. Every one of them is against international law. We have received the confirmation of that legal decision very recently, again by the International Criminal Court of Justice from Hague, that Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza is essentially illegal, and so are the settlement expansion. But during the terms of Donald Trump, he started a new initiative called the Abrahamic Accords, and many countries like the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain signed on. I don't know what the status of Sudan is, and there was also hope that Saudi Arabia would sign on. So basically, it was to bring about comprehensive peace between Arab countries and Israel. But what it did was to basically bypass the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian question. So for the Palestinians, it appeared as if the Abrahamic Accords were simply marginalizing their problems, and so there was going to be no step forward to create a Palestinian state. And if Israel was to have normalized relations with the rest of the Arab world and the Middle East, its neighborhood, then the issue of the Palestinians. I think the primary motivation for Hamas's attack was to essentially end the Abrahamic Accords. This is a minority opinion in the United States, but a majority opinion in the rest of the world, that the two expansions under Biden, his attempt to expand the Abrahamic Accords to include Saudi Arabia and his attempt to expand NATO to include Ukraine, are the primary reasons why we have these two wars. Very prominent commentators like Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, he's one of the most important voices in international relations theory, also shares his opinion. Most Americans basically assume that the evil is always on the other side, so it's out of just sheer evil that Hamas attacked Israel, and it is out of sheer evil that Putin attacked Ukraine, and therefore, but this is not the opinion of the rest of the world, as you can see in UN resolutions over and over again. In fact, yesterday also, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the end of the occupation with over 124 seats, and only 14 countries opposed that resolution. So you can see how the world opinion is on one side and how the US and its few allies are on one side. The Hamas's attack was terrible. It was brutal. It killed over 1,250 people. It was targeted civilians. There were reports of rape and killing of children. Essentially, Hamas had about 5 to 6 hours to do whatever it chose to do, and it showed the most brutal and inhuman face possible. One of the things is, when you're studying just war or even theories of jihad, there are two elements to it. One is that your cause must be just, and then your means must be just. So in this particular war, I think both sides have a just cause. Hamas has a right to fight for freedom, and every population, everybody has a fundamental right not to be occupied, and not to live under a brutal military occupation for over 7 decades. So they have a just cause. Their right to an independent state is a just cause, but the means that they employed on that particular day has been literally illegal, horrible, deserving of all condemnations. But Israel too, even though it has the right to self-defense, that is a just cause, but the manner in which it has responded is also, I think, not justifiable. So it violates principles of ethics, of international law, and everything else. Even the staunchest supporters of Israel, like the ironclad supporter Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden has ironclad support for nothing. He doesn't have an ironclad support for America, or for Medicare, or for jobs for all, or for infrastructure. He has only ironclad support for Israel. And even he kept saying that how Israel defends itself matters. So one of the things that has happened is that both the parties have been committing huge atrocities, but Hamas's atrocities lasted for 6 hours or more. And then if you take the agony that the families of the hostages have been suffering all these days, that is the crimes that Hamas has committed. But Israel has basically killed over 41,000 Palestinians. A vast majority of them are women and children. Over 70% are women and children. They have destroyed most of the country, most of the infrastructure, all universities, all hospitals, all schools. They are starving them, and they are also cutting water supply. Many of these have already been condemned by the United Nations. as crimes against humanity and also violation of the Genocide Convention. Uh, Even though the United States keeps saying that at the end of this war, whenever it ends, if at all it ever ends, we will have to move towards a two-state solution. That is the only solution possible. But Joe Biden, while on a daily basis he cooperates with Israel, sends weapons, sends money. We have sent over $50 billion so far, close to $50 billion. I think the first tranche was about 14 and a half, and then subsequently another 20 plus billions of dollars. There has been no plan on how we will move towards the two-state solution once there is a ceasefire or end of this war. The United States' role in this war and the other war has been quite contrary to its own values. So, for example, as soon as the Russian invasion of Ukraine took place, it was within weeks we were talking of genocide in the war. We were talking of using international law against Putin, and even arrest warrants were issued against Putin. Now the United States even goes to the length to delegitimize international institutions to defend Israel. For example, when it allowed one Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire to go through, it immediately then labeled it as non-binding. If even Security Council resolutions are not binding, then there is no international law in this world. But a lot of things have happened in the last, shall we say, nearly 1 year of this war that has been going on. And there are questions about what is the purpose of Israeli response in Gaza. And the stated purpose is that they want to destroy Hamas. Hamas is a movement, and it continues to survive today. For the last several months, the United States and Israel often are in direct negotiations with Hamas while also simultaneously trying to allegedly destroy Hamas. So clearly Hamas has not been destroyed. Yes, Israel has had some victories, killing its political leader in Tehran, which was quite a spectacular action, to be able to go to the heart of Iran's official establishment. They killed him in an IRGC guest house. So yes, they have had those kind of victories, but they haven't killed the movement. And these movements exist because there is a military occupation. And unless you murder and kill all Palestinians, there will be Palestinians asking for an independent Palestinian state. Who wants to live under a military occupation indefinitely, and especially when on a daily basis your land and your homes are being taken away, stolen, and some foreigners are coming and then getting to live in those same homes. So the cause that gives birth to groups like Hamas and others is not being addressed at all. It hasn't been addressed in the last 11 months. And there is this attempt to destroy Hamas, and clearly that hasn't happened. But if you look at the attack of Hamas itself, contrast that to this amazingly, stunningly brilliant operation that Israel conducted against Hezbollah, which is blowing up their pages and also their walkie-talkies. I think about 20 people have died, and several hundred have been injured by those explosions. So it was a very complicated operation of whatever you want to call it, counterintelligence, whatever. Basically, they found out that Hezbollah was buying these devices from a company, and somewhere those devices were intercepted, and in those devices, literally explosives were installed, and also a trigger was installed. And so when Israel chose, it was able to trigger those explosions. So this is perhaps one of the most spectacular operations that Israel has conducted. And in this war, with the killing of Hania in Tehran, these are amazing achievements from an intelligence point of view. But then if you look at what happened on October 7th, the Egyptians say that they gave a 3 days before the event, the Egyptians warned the Israelis that the Hamas was going to attack. But there was nothing there. Hamas was able to cross over into from Gaza into Israel. It went around on rampage for more than 6 hours, and there was no one showed up. Neither the IDF was there, and then Israeli response took over 6 hours to happen. So the attack of Hamas was the failure of intelligence, clearly, unless you want to subscribe to conspiracy theories that said that Netanyahu wanted such an attack to happen so that it would justify him becoming more of a national security stage to continue his politics, etc. If you subscribe to those conspiracy theories, then they are out there. But otherwise, it was an intelligence failure, clearly, number one. Number two, it was a security failure. So fine, you were surprised by the attack, but where are your defenses? And the most scary thing from an Israeli point of view is that it was a failure of deterrence. That Israel has always been very brutal in Gaza in its responses. So just go back and just Google images and see Israel attacks Gaza. Look at various years, 2007, 9. I think there have been 4 wars between Israel and Gaza in the past several years, at least 14, 15 years. So, but in spite of the brutal punishment that Israel regularly metes out to the Palestinians, it has not been able to create a deterrence. Palestinians are not thinking, or the Gazans are not thinking, look, if we attack them and break their finger, they will come and burn our village down and kill all of us. I mean, that is the deterrence that Israel wants to create, right? That if you take one step towards us, we will take 100 towards you, we will punish you so badly that you will never be able to recover or stand up. But that is not working. I mean, this is a philosophical question, but Israel will have to recognize that if it doesn't have a deterrence, then there will be similar events happening again and again and again. And that is where the two-state solution becomes so much more critical. But Israel's brutal response in the last nearly 1 year has had a lot of other geopolitical consequences. For example, Israel had very good relations with Russia as well as with China, and now it does not. China is firmly supporting the Palestinians. If you look at the vote yesterday in the UN General Assembly, both China and Russia voted against Israel. The only non-Western country which is kind of aligned with Israel to some extent is India, but India is talking from both sides of its mouth. When Jaishankar was in Riyadh last week for the GCC Strategic Summit, he talked about the plight and the suffering of the Palestinians and condemned that. And then India continues to be one of the few countries like the US, Canada, Germany, and UK who are selling weapons to Israel during this war, and those weapons are being used against civilians. So all of these countries are also actually in violation of international law because their weapons, and also I think their own domestic laws, because their weapons are being used in genocide and targeting civilians, yet they continue to sell weapons to Israel. But Israel has lost not just Russia and China, but Israel has also lost several European countries. For example, Spain, Norway, and Ireland have recognized the Palestinian state. The French election was very interesting. I don't know how many of you followed the French election. It basically, no party got majority enough to form a government, and so Macron is playing all kinds of political games. But the faction which got the most seats in the parliament is the left of center. And the leftist parties said, as soon as they established government, which they thought they would as the largest party, they would recognize Palestine as a state. So the Gaza issue not only helped the far left in France win elections, but it also helped and had an impact on the British elections. There are about 26 new members in the British Parliament whose main issue in the election, including Jeremy Corbyn, was the war in Gaza. So in that sense, Israel has, as a result of this war, lost a lot of moral support, public opinion support in most of Europe. I mean, there are a few places in Europe which are very, very Islamophobic and also and therefore they are supporting Israel because they're absolutely delighted that Israel is killing Muslims in Gaza. Like basically a large segment of the Indian population, they are very happy because Israel is killing Muslims. So there is an Islamophobic element to the support that Israel gets in certain parts of the world. But this division between Israel and Europe is going to be very significant in the long run, because it will have an impact on relations between the world. If Israel's goal is to become a normal state, like any other state, Israel wants to become like Spain, or have normal relations with other countries without its identity and its occupation and its crimes against Palestine being an issue in that relationship. And therefore, the Abrahamic Accords were so sought after. And that project of Israel trying to become a normal state has been completely upended by this war in Gaza. But something else has also happened. This war in Gaza is also changing America. Support for Palestine has been on the increase in the United States. You saw protests on campuses. It was unbelievable. The amount of brutality with which the US governments and university officials have responded, not only just against students, but also against professors. There are professors who have been thrown by cops and brutally manhandled, literally, by police officers. 70-year-old philosophy professors have been badly handled in many parts of the country. And in order to protect the United States' continued uncritical support for Israel, the US is becoming an illiberal state. They're passing resolutions in the Congress and passing laws and changing rules at universities to essentially squash any speech that is critical of Israel. Anybody who says that this is a genocidal war, anybody who is critical is immediately labeled anti-Semitic. And then procedures, steps are taken. And so there is a freezing of free speech in American universities. So congratulations, you and I, we are all rebels today against the United States emerging illiberal state. Joe Biden's America was supposed to bring democracy back, but on this issue, it has become a totalitarian state. So we will continue to see this. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being used to foster and maintain public support for Israel, but that is dwindling. In fact, it has reached such a point that in the Democratic Party now, a majority of Democrats are more supportive of Palestinians than they are supportive of Israel. A majority of them consider what is going on there as genocidal. They disagree with Joe Biden's foreign policy. In fact, the only people who actually support Joe Biden's foreign policy in the Middle East are the Republicans, which means Biden is no different from Trump when it comes to this particular issue. His own party members are opposed to him. You can see the difference in the way the new nominee, Kamala Harris, talks about this issue and the way Biden talked about it. Biden would always say, I'm a Zionist, and then he would start, my father told me you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist, and therefore I have an ironclad support for Israel. Basically means even if they commit a genocide, I'm not going to stop supporting them. And he's been calling for a ceasefire for nearly 6 months, and Israel has not basically agreed to do that, and he has not taken any measures. There has been a rebellion in the State Department. Many people who work on the Middle East related issues have quit the State Department, have protested the State Department, basically arguing that both Blinken and Biden are violating America's own laws in the manner in which there are rules and regulations about how you sell weapons to other countries, and including Israel. And the United States has been violating all of those principles, which are made by, in some cases, this very administration. So Biden is violating the very rules he made coming into the State Department about how weapons will be sold to foreign countries. But this is also interesting part is that if you look at America across age, so the older the people are, most people above 50 are immune to to the genocide in Gaza. Uh, I don't know how your conscience cannot be moved by so much destruction. And they are very supportive of Israel and Israel's right to defend. Nobody ever talks about the Palestinian right to defend, or the Palestinian right to dignity, or the Palestinian right to safety, or Palestinian right to state as much as we just talk about Israel's right to defend, which means Israel can do whatever it likes as long as it says it is doing that in defense. Uh, but a lot of Americans below the age of 30 definitely do not support this foreign policy, which means that while today's America will continue to support whatever Israel does in Gaza, tomorrow's America is not ready to do that. And the meeting place for today's and tomorrow's America was so profound that Joe Biden had to leave. After winning the primaries, he had to withdraw. I don't think any president in America's history has been so humiliated that after winning the primary of his own party, he was told by his own party members that you should leave. Because if you don't leave, not only are you going to lose, but we're going to get wiped out in the Senate as well as the House. And if Trump wins and has both Senate and the House, then bye-bye democracy, bye-bye many things. So it was quite shocking. And remember one thing about Biden, his approval ratings were in the dumps even before the debate. During the debate, we realized, at least a lot of other people, I've been talking about this from the beginning of the year, that he should not win the primaries. But it was only in the debate that people were shocked at how unfit he had become, cognitively speaking, to be the president of the most powerful country and be giving away billions of dollars in weapons all over the world. So yes, even the Democrats realized that this man had to go, and it was quite humiliating. And one of the primary reasons for that is his Gaza policy. And let me explain how. So see, America is a very peculiar democracy. Someone said jokingly that two people run for office and the guy who gets lesser votes wins, referring to how George W. Bush became president, and also how Donald Trump became president. They lost the popular vote, but they won the Electoral College. So in order to win Electoral College, Joe Biden had only one path, which was he had to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and maybe also Minnesota to become president. Kamala Harris, at least last week, the polls have changed today. New York Times says that Trump now leads nationally, and he's only 1% behind in Pennsylvania. That's according to polls today. That you can see that in the New York Times today. But Kamala Harris, at least last week, had two pathways to becoming president, which is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota. This is the Midwest path, and she also has another path, which is winning North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and maybe even Georgia. Now they say that even Florida is in play for her. So how did this happen? The difference is the so-called non-committed vote. So if you look at the election polling, Biden won 14 million votes, but there were 500,000 votes that were cast, to some extent up to 15%, I think, in Minnesota or more. I don't recall, but the sheer size of those who were uncommitted, which means they are Democrats, but they would not vote for Biden until there was a ceasefire or because of his Gaza policy. There was no other issue. And the people who are uncommitted are Muslims, Arabs, young people, mostly college students and college going, and basically people below the age of 30 and 18 to 30, obviously. And also progressive Democrats, like two of them who lost their elections because of a lot of pro-Israel funding was used against them, especially Jamal Bowman in New York and Cory Bush. Both of them lost their primaries because millions of dollars were used against them, but still the others survived, primarily Ilhan Omar. in Minnesota. So there has been a huge, for the first time, an electoral level impact in the United States because of the Israeli policy. In the past, if you were tough on Israel, you would lose elections, like George H. Bush. He threatened to impose sanctions on Israel if it continued to build settlements. He was president from 88 to 92. So even though he won a war, he lost the elections, partly because the economy was not doing well, and Clinton came up with this very famous line called "Is the economy stupid?" And just focused on domestic politics, but also because one of the reasons why he lost is because he was being critical of Israel, and the pro-Israel lobby worked very hard against him. But it was never the other way around. This is the first time that the fortunes of a sitting American president, electoral fortunes, have been impacted by his or her Gaza policy. So this war, with its excessive devastation that it has caused, there's also this perception in the United States too that Netanyahu wants to go on with this war because there's a fear that if the war ends, then he will go to jail because there are so many criminal cases, corruption cases that are being filed against him. So he wants to keep the country on a war footing, and therefore he would not want to end the ceasefire. So more and more Americans are becoming familiar with this argument. So even among the American elite, who more or less were on the same page for a long time, we are beginning to see the divisions on that. There is a more recent polling by Brookings Institution, as well as the Chicago Council on World Affairs, about public opinion in the United States about it. And a vast, not a vast, 53% is a majority. Majority of Americans are not interested in rebuilding either Gaza or Israel with their money. But of course, I won't be surprised that Biden on his way out then throws a few more $1 billion towards Israel on his way out. So Israel will have a lot of money to rebuild itself and for buying more weapons and waging more wars. So, but nevertheless, I think one of the biggest consequences of this war is changing perception on that issue and prioritizing of that issue in Europe as well as in the United States. Even in Canada, the government was forced to do something really very shady. We don't usually associate Canada with very shady things, but it does a lot of shady things. Like, for example, the government announced publicly that it's not going to sell weapons to Israel, and then reroutes those same weapons through the United States. So it is trying to do both. The government is trying to assuage the public opinion, which is against selling weapons to Israel. But actually also selling, so supporting, because many of them take a lot of money from Israel. We always talk about the fact that one of the reasons why the United States supports Israel is because of its shared public opinion. Do a simple Google search, contributions of the Israeli lobby to American politicians. You will find this on opensecrets.org, and you'll find it's right up there. Just Google that. You'll find the guy who received the largest amount of money from the Israeli lobby, AIPAC. Zero. I don't need to give you an award to guess. The guy who is the most supportive of Israel, which is Joe Biden. He has received the largest amount, I think $6 million. So you can see that. So he owes many of his electoral victories to this particular lobby. If these are shared values, why do you need to take money to support them? It's a domestic political issue, and that the fact that Israel's war was so brutal that it is breaking the domestic consensus on support for Israel. So I think that is a very significant thing. And the more brutal the US becomes in suppressing its own population, like against students and etc., I think it will do more damage to US commitment to Israel. The United States, because the US is so powerful, so rich, it can afford to make many, many mistakes and not suffer, as opposed to other countries, which when they make foreign policy errors, they pay a big price. So the US has committed a lot of foreign policy errors. This is a failure. So if you look at it, if you go back and look at early statements made by Biden about the war, he said very clearly that we will destroy Hamas, and then we will establish ceasefire, and then we will work towards the creation of the two-state solution. And one of my major goals is to prevent the expansion of this war. And lo and behold, I mean, this war has become a regional war. Israel is being attacked not just by Hamas, but also by Hezbollah from the north, and now Houthis from at least, I don't know, 2,000 miles away. And just this week, the Houthis shot a hypersonic missile that landed in the middle of Israel, went through the Israeli defenses. And that is, if I was interested in Israeli security,
yes,
that would be very, very scary and troubling. So there has been an expansion of the war. Israel is at war with several countries right now. It has attacked Syria, it has attacked Lebanon, it has attacked Iran, it has attacked Yemen, and of course it is at war with the territories. The war has also expanded to West Bank. So in many, many ways, you could argue that the US goal of preventing an expansion of this conflict has to a great extent failed, and its goal to expand the Abrahamic Accords is now on pause. Saudis are in no way in a rush to have some kind of understanding and recognition of Israel. I have only one more point to make, that and another interesting thing that has happened is the rulings which have come from both the ICC and ICJ. ICC is International Criminal Court, which basically deals with persons, and ICJ is International Court of Justice. Both are in Hague, which deals with countries. So South Africa has filed a case of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice, but also asked for an interim provisional ruling. And in the provisional ruling, the ICJ has basically said it's quite possible that Israel has violated some of the elements of the Genocide Convention. And not only that, but it has also instructed Israel to take measures so that it is not committing a genocide in Israel, in Gaza. And so in that sense, you could argue that ICJ's ruling is quite negative for Israel. ICC, on the other hand, has requested arrest warrants against Netanyahu and the defense minister of Israel, along with Hamas activists. So they're on the same page as wanted by ICC. So the International Criminal Court's request for arrest warrants are basically being reviewed. The decision should come anytime soon. And if they do issue an arrest warrant, then Netanyahu will not be able to travel because, unfortunately for him, the countries which Israel is really friendly with are also countries in Europe, except the United States, of course. US doesn't respect international law. US is not even part of ICC. But most European countries are, and they will arrest him if he goes to any of the European countries. So another thing that has really happened is that the international law, bodies that protect international law, have taken a very, very serious cognizance of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. And finally...
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan.
Yes, so I will stop at that, and I'll be happy to take any questions.